The conclusion of Friday the 13th The Carnival by Eric Morse. Chapter 23. No Way Out. The blow from the mallet caught Vince Fantana flush in the head. There was a sickening, squishy thud like the sound Maxie heard the time she dropped pumpkins off the highway overpass onto unsuspecting motorists. The squat man crumpled soundlessly. Maxie didn't look to see whether the man was still alive. She was running again, and the man with the mallet was coming after her. She didn't see the girl until she was running alongside her. She almost jumped out of her skin when she felt her presence. Then she saw that it was the fortune teller's daughter. The girl must have come out from behind the two booths. Selena grabbed her arm and started pulling her toward an open door. Maxie vaguely recognized the place. It was the fortune-telling booth. Selena closed and latched the door behind them. They backed away from the door. Almost at once, the door rattled violently as the man hurled himself against it. The latch held. Clinging to each other, the girls backed away further as the first splintering blow struck, and they saw the big flathead of the mallet coming through the door. Selena pulled Maxie hard as they plunged through the curtain and out through the booth's back door. Selena had her by the hand now, leading her quickly through the narrow maze of grass that led behind the booths. They hurtled over the low wall that surrounded the bumper car enclosure. Though the ride was deserted, the cars were whizzing around like mad. One car bumped Maxie hard, and she went down, smacking her head against the thick rubber mat. Selena grabbed her arm, helping her up. Then they both froze. The snub-nosed metal cars were circling like sharks. The wires that connected them to their overhead power grid sparked wildly. And then the man in the mask turned the corner, holding the huge mallet at his side. He stopped when he saw them, but only for a second. Then he started after them. "Come on!" Selena shrieked. They raced on, keeping just ahead of the onrushing cars. The two girls vaulted over the far wall like Olympus hurdlers running neck and neck. Up ahead, Maxie saw the wire fence. She ran toward it, but Selena practically tackled her from behind. "No! It's electric! Don't touch it!" Maxie's hands was inches from the fence. She could feel the heat coming off the wire mesh. The image of her father and Beverly flashed back through her, like a stake driven into her brain, and she realized that Selena was right. "People have been trying to climb out. They're getting fried," Selena said, gulping for breath. "The whole thing's so red hot there are fires breaking out all over the place." For the first time, Maxie realized that the darkness of the sky was not just the dark of night, but the dark of smoke. And as they ran on, she started to smell it, inhale it. It was an awful, stinging smoke that burned her lungs as she took each desperate breath. We can't get out," she repeated numbly when they stopped again, gasping. "No," Selena hissed. "And that psychopath is going around killing everyone." The girl had a firm grip on Maxie's arm again and was pulling her, but where? Wherever, Maxie followed. Now that Maxie was looking for bodies, she spotted them everywhere. Some bodies here. People that had tried to climb over the fence were grilled like human waffles. Bodies were lying on the floor of the maniacally spinning carousel, lying beneath the gaping, bloody mouths of the horses. Their bodies looked as if they'd been torn apart by a creature with an animal rage. In the distance, she saw a blond boy screaming as he whooshed down the water slide. The slide was shaking wildly, and before the boy hit the bottom, his scream was cut off as the entire slide collapsed with a loud crash. Maxie skidded to a halt, staring at the fallen ride in disbelief. "The boy!" She started toward the slide when she saw the boy moving, but Selena grabbed her. "This way!" They ran between two booths. Selena looked both ways, held up her hand for silence. Then they stole out into the next lane. Up ahead was the haunted funhouse, the ride shutter banging furiously. As they were slinking past the ride, Selena whispered fiercely, "Down!" They hid behind the black car which sat outside the ride's front entrance. "He's coming," Maxie whimpered. Selena put a forefinger across her lips. She nodded her head to indicate where Mitch was standing. He was just 20 yards away, one fist on his hip, the mallet slung over his shoulder like a batter, waiting for his turn at the plate. He was staring straight at the funhouse. And then the two girls looked at each other with shared terror, because the amusement ride car, which was the only thing in between them and death, had started to move. Chapter 24. The House of Death. The car kept moving. Maxie and Selena moved along with it, letting the car lead them into the funhouse. As the car pushed through the double doors, Selena climbed into the black leather seat. Maxie climbed in alongside her. The car swooped down violently into the darkness. Maxie had to cover her mouth to stifle a scream. The car started climbing slowly upward, past painted horrors on the walls, skulls, goblins, and dismembered hands holding candles. Over the loudspeaker, a melodramatic voice intoned, "Welcome to the House of Death!" The voice chuckled maniacally. Ordinarily, a ride like this would have bored her. Now it terrified her. They reached the top of the rise, and the mechanical car turned right, leading them into a room filled with wax figures. Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman. Maxie had never seen such realistic wax figures in her life. Why, the wax bodies looked as if they were dripping and wet, and she heard a horrible squelching sound, like sticky footsteps. She turned back sharply, and God in heaven, if the Dracula statue didn't seem closer to her than it had a second ago. Moving faster, the car rushed them into a room that was decorated with vampire bats, their wings mechanically flapping. And then Maxie felt a man's fingers brush through her hair. She started screaming. She kept screaming even as she realized the fingers were just furry strips of cloth that were hanging down from the ceiling above. Selena was holding on to her, trying to calm her down. It was pretty hard to calm down while the Bat Chamber soundtrack screeched fake bat sounds in her ears. And as the car raced out of the bat room, there was a whooshing sound, dark fluttering sounds that sounded an awful lot like real bats. Sparks shot up as the car sharply turned the corner, pitching Maxie hard into Selena. Then she heard organ music. The little car banged through another set of doors as they entered a small dark room that appeared to be decorated like a funeral chapel. Maxie, who thought she was all screamed out, screamed again as she saw a large black coffin opening. A skeleton popped out to grin at her. It reached out its bony hand and grabbed the collar of her gray t-shirt. Only the force of the car whipping along the track broke the skeleton's iron grip. Her shirt ripped down the middle. Then the mechanical figure who was playing the organ turned his white skeleton face right into hers. Smiling, the organ player reached out and grabbed her hair. Her head was jerked violently back. She felt hair ripping out by the roots as the car hurtled onward into the haunted darkness. Screams of terror kept escaping from Maxie. Selena was screaming along with her, but she was shouting Maxie's name. Maxie turned to stare at her dully. The girl's face was full of anger and determination. In her terror, it took Maxie a moment to focus and hear what the girl was shouting. "It's not real! It's just a ride!" Selena hissed. "You've got to keep quiet! He'll hear us!" And then Maxie saw him, his eyes gleaming green in the darkness. Except that's all the eyes were. Eyes floating all by themselves. Just another part of the ride. So was the dismembered hand that caressed her cheek, as Maxie kept telling herself that Selena was right. She was just imagining things as the car took another sharp turn, sending up a shower of sparks that singed what was left of Maxie's beautiful dark hair. They stopped short in front of a funhouse mirror. In the mirror, their faces were already distorted with terror. Were distorted even more, becoming grotesquely long. And then a sea of red, blobby gulls appeared in the mirror, hovering right behind Maxie's back. "Not real," she shouted at herself. "Not real!" But as the car jolted forward, she could feel the red goo dripping from her neck where the gulls had touched her. They flew into the next room, and Maxie caught a speeding glimpse of the various torture methods on display here. Papier-mâché figures groaned and screamed silently as they were stretched out on racks or pressed to death under piles of rocks. But that wasn't what caught Maxie's eye. She had always prided herself on being a daredevil. It was now or never. Despite the terrible speed of the car, she suddenly stood. Selena, yelling, grabbed her waist, but Maxie didn't look down. She kept her eyes on the wall as they rushed by, and at the moment they came closest to the wall, she leaned way out. She was about to fall. With one hand, she grabbed a hold of one of the antique axes hanging there. The car swung right, and Maxie and Selena both fell back into the car, but Maxie held on to the axe's wooden handle. There was a crash as the axe blade smashed down hard onto the floor. Reaching out with her other hand, she was able to lift the weapon into the car. They whooshed out of the room. It was an old-fashioned axe, she now saw, with two large symmetrical blades that faced in opposite directions. The kind of axe you saw in movies about knights and castles. Selena was shaking her, whispering, "Yes, yes," as their car twisted left. "Get going!" With a horrible jolt, they banged through another set of doors and crashed to a halt. Sudden silence attacked them. Maxie looked around, every sense keen. She heard the steady drip, drip, drip of the water torture display in the room they had just left, and in the far distance the faint organ grinder music of the fairgrounds still playing cheerfully. She smelled dust, rot, and plaster. More importantly, she smelled sweat and blood. As her eyes adjusted to the room's deeper darkness, she recognized the statues of many familiar figures. Jack the Ripper was holding a disemboweled woman in his arms. The Boston Strangler had another victim at his feet. Under the guillotine, Marie Antoinette waited, her pretty neck bared. That neck looked so real. Maxie could almost see her carotid artery pulsing as the woman waited for the blade to fall. Selena and Maxie both climbed carefully out of the car. Selena took a few tentative steps forward into the dark room. Behind her, Maxie clutched the huge axe in her hands like a baseball bat. It was so heavy she wasn't sure she could swing it. "Where are we?" she whispered to Selena. "You're in the Chamber of Horrors," a voice answered, whispering right into her ear. Chapter 25. The Chamber of Horrors. Maxie jumped straight up into the air. When she saw what was behind her, she jumped a second time. But it was only a statue of Lizzie Borden, the famous axe murderess, gazing at her with painted eyes. The statue held an axe above her head. So Maxie must have just imagined that she heard the statue whisper. The statue blinked. Maxie backed away, terrified all over again. Selena tried to grab her as she went by, but she pulled free. Maybe Selena was right. Maybe Maxie was going crazy. It didn't matter to her. All she knew was that she had to get away from the statue of Lizzie Borden. Then she saw the strange look on Selena's face. At the same instant, Maxie felt the man grab her from behind. His arms were like taut ropes that squeezed the breath right out of her. Twisting and struggling, she caught only glimpses of her attacker, saw the man's white mask as he dragged her violently across the room, and wham! He slammed her up against the wall. It felt as if her entire body had locked into one solid mass of hurt. Whatever breath she had left, he had totally knocked it out of her. But even in this shocked, numb state, she could feel one of the man's large, tattooed hands as it roamed freely over her body. She dropped the axe. Selena was running forward. She crouched down and grabbed the wooden handle of the fallen weapon. But before she could lift it, the man in the mask stomped one big boot down onto the wide, thin silver blade. He let go of Maxie, letting her slump down along the wall. The man was holding something behind his back. In her dazed state, Maxie couldn't make out what it was. Selena was still struggling with the handle of the weapon, trying to pry the blade out from under the man's boot. She had almost gotten the axe free when the man in the mask kicked out wildly, catching Selena right in the ribs. With a low groan, Selena fell backward. The man marched forward. He started kicking her again and again. He was chuckling. Each time he let the girl get up on all fours before he let loose with the next blow. When he tired of this game, he took out the weapon he was holding behind his back. It was a weapon he had brought along from the torture chamber, the cat of nine tails. He cracked the whip. The jagged pieces of metal at the ends of the 9 thongs caught Selena in the legs, the arms, and the face. She tried to dodge the blows, but the whip snapped like an angry nest of vipers, and with each lashing, at least half the tails hit home. Her breath back at last, Maxie charged forward. Before he could lash Selena again, she seized the man's hand. The man didn't even turn, just flung her aside. She tried to hold on to him with both hands, tried to pull the whip away from his grasp. But all she managed to do was catch one strand of the rope, so that as the man lashed Selena again, the jagged metal raked through Maxie's palms. She screamed, staring down at her hands in horror. Then the man turned and flicked the whip right at her. She felt the blows, 9 knives all landing. She went down. Selena, too, lay in a bleeding heap. The man stomped over to her and, holding her by the collar of her blouse, dragged her over to the guillotine. He pulled her up to a sitting position. Then, yanking her dark bun of hair as if it were a handle, he threaded her head through the guillotine's wooden hole. He positioned her neck right under the path of the blade. She was lying right on top of the statue of Marie Antoinette. The force of Selena's weight caused the statue's arms to rise in the air, so that it looked like the statue was giving Selena a hug, or holding her in place for her execution. Maxie struggled to her feet. She charged. With bleeding hands, she flailed helplessly at the powerful man. He didn't seem to feel the blows. He pulled the cord to release the guillotine's huge, sharp blade. It hurtled down toward Selena's bare neck. Chapter 26. The Guillotine. Selena was screaming. So was Maxie, as the shiny blade stopped short, just inches from Selena's throat. The blade had jammed. The man in the hockey mask quickly pushed down on the blade with both hands. It jerked downward another inch, but it went down crooked. On one side, the blade was now jammed even deeper into the wood. On the other side, the razor was kissing Selena's goose-pimpled skin. As the man struggled to push down the blade the rest of the way, Maxie remembered the axe. She raced across the room. It took all her strength to lift the heavy weapon. The wooden handle slipped in the blood flowing freely from her palm. She staggered toward the man as he bent over the guillotine, working feverishly on the jammed blade. She raised the silver axe over her head, and then the axe began to fall. The blade sliced into the back of the man's head, sticking out like a knife buried to the hilt in a melon. He fell forward, onto the guillotine. Selena screamed again. His weight had brought the blade down another fraction of an inch, just enough for Selena to feel the steel begin to cut her. "Off! Off!" Selena was yelling through clenched teeth. Maxie grabbed the man's t-shirt, but the flimsy cloth ripped away in her bloody grasp. The man fell back again, and this time Selena didn't even scream. Maxie buried her fingers in the man's greasy hair, gripping the locks. She managed to pull the man off the guillotine, letting him drop to the floor at her feet. Even as he fell, the hands of his dead body seemed to cling to her, groping for her, trying to pull her down along with him. She went to work, desperately trying to inch the blade up and off Selena's neck. Selena was crying now, silent tears leaking out of her eyes and running down the sides of her face. Those eyes locked on Maxie's begged her to hurry. There was a snapping sound as the blade jerked upward. Selena was free. But just barely. Maxie helped her ease her head back out of the wooden hole. There was so little room that the blade scraped Selena's chin, then her nose, drawing fresh blood. Maxie helped Selena sit up. The girl had a string of red beads across her neck like a necklace of blood. She was crying loudly now, horrible, hiccuping sobs. It was Maxie's turn to comfort her, wrapping her in an embrace. "You're okay," she yelled. "You're okay." She found she couldn't talk more softly than a shout. As she hugged Selena, Maxie looked down past the guillotine, down into the metal bucket that lay on the floor, ready to catch Marie Antoinette's chopped-off head. The bucket was full. Casey's blonde head lay in the rusty metal bottom, staring up at her, her eyes bugged out with terror. Shrieking wildly, Maxie tottered backward. She kept raising and lowering her bleeding hands as if to cover her face. "Maxie! Maxie!" Selena was shouting at her. "Come on! We've got to get out of here, Maxie!" Selena pulled Maxie's arm, dragging her away from the guillotine, away from the dead man on the floor. Leaning against each other, the two girls started following the metal track that led out of the room. There was a loud rumbling. They jumped to the side of the track just in time to avoid an empty car whizzing by in a frenzy. Maxie thought she felt the floor shaking. Then the statue of Jack the Ripper caught her eye. The statue's eyes were gleaming coldly in the darkness. His hand, the hand that held the straight-edged razor, moved ever so slightly. His dusty lips twitched upward in a smile. Movement to her left. Maxie's head spun, just in time to see Marie Antoinette sitting up by the guillotine and smiling. The spooky organ music turned up to the highest notch yet. Then the disemboweled woman who lay at Jack the Ripper's feet began to rise. So did the woman with the horribly blue face whom the Boston Strangler had strangled. But where was the Boston Strangler himself? Chapter 27. The D Word. The Boston Strangler's hands were dry as dust as they clamped down on Maxie's windpipe. She felt herself falling backward into his arms. The statue stood in the middle of the track, choking her with a vicious frenzy. Selena was punching him and kicking him, but it was of no use. He was going to choke Maxie to death. He would have done it too, except just then, the next funhouse car zoomed by on the track and ran right into the back of the Strangler's knees. He fell hard, dragging Maxie down with him. The car was right on top of him, its wheels spinning as it struggled to move forward. The car was grinding his legs into white powder. Selena dragged Maxie out of the killer's grasp, but now the statues were all coming fast, their dusty mouths grinning hideously. Coughing and gasping for air, Maxie held on to Selena as they hobbled down the track toward the exits, the music blaring everywhere. They banged out through the double doors. Outside, the smoky air felt like pure oxygen after the dust and the terror of the funhouse. They kept running, Maxie looking back over her shoulder, expecting at any moment to see the funhouse statues lurching toward them. But no one followed. Maxie was no longer looking back when the black cloud of vampire bats emerged from the funhouse door. The bats flew off in jagged circles. One large bat, his head streaked with white, where the artist had missed a spot, was leading the rest. Luckily for Maxie and Selena, This large bat led the flock high into the night sky. The screeching of the bats grew fainter and fainter. The bats were gone. When they could run no more, Maxie and Selena collapsed onto the grass in the middle of the fairgrounds, gasping for air. The fairgrounds were brighter than before. It took Maxie a moment to figure out why. All the rides were going at once. The Ferris wheel was whirling, the carousel spinning. On the roller coaster, the empty cars were flying around the tracks at blurring speed. Even the organ grinder music was going faster and faster. Cutting through the music was the high-pitched grinding of gears. To Maxie, it sounded as if the grinding rides were screeching out a single word, over and over. Jason, Jason, Jason. That wasn't all. The scrambler was on fire. So was the tunnel of love. Selena was bleeding pretty badly, Maxie saw. So was she, but she didn't feel any pain. Her brain was screaming louder than her body. They had to get out. She managed to get to her feet. Her breath hadn't slowed. Her horror was growing. And suddenly, it was all too much for her as the realization struck full force. "My friends!" she gasped. "My friends!" She couldn't say it, could barely even think it, but still somehow she knew. All of her friends were dead. She was crying, holding her bleeding hands up near her face. Her salty tears dropped into the gashes in her palms, and each drop stung like a lash. "It's my fault. I let them down. I abandoned them." With a groan, Selena worked her way to her feet. She was crying too. She reached out a hand to Maxie, but Maxie was bleeding in so many places she didn't dare touch her. "Don't be crazy. It's not your fault, Maxie." "Oh, yes. Yes, it is." Maxie's whole face squinched together violently. "Oh, God. Oh, God, my daddy!" She couldn't stop sobbing. It was as if her wounds had opened up holes inside of her, and her feelings were floating out. There was no stopping them. I loved him," she wept. But it was no use saying that now. Too late. Too late to try to get along with her father. Too late to be kind to her mother. Too late to be good to her friends. She had craved her father's attention so badly. Well, she had gotten some attention, all right. The wrong kind. Selena rested a hand gently on Maxie's shoulder. "This way," she said. But the truth was she had no idea which way to turn. And after the two girls had wandered a few yards, Selena stopped. Her head dropped. She, too, was weeping. I should have warned you." Maxie could barely hear what the girl was saying. "What?" "The tarot cards. I lied. The cards showed. They showed that you and your friends would die tonight. I should have warned you. That's what the cards were saying. Don't you see? I never got such a strong message in my life." Still weeping, Maxie made a gesture of dismissal with her wounded hands. "It wasn't your fault. It was mine." No. Yes, it was," Maxie shouted. She was shaking. She snuffled uselessly. Her nose was running as freely as her eyes. And then suddenly she was laughing hysterically, and the laughter was almost indistinguishable from her sobs. "Hey," she said, "you don't really believe in those cards, do you?" Selena nodded, her eyes shining with grief. Maxie grinned through her tears. "Then how come I'm still alive, huh? Answer me that." She felt an angry triumph surging through her. "Huh? Answer me. How come I'm still here?" The answer came bounding toward her. It was Mitch's snarling Rottweiler, Stump, racing out of the shadows. Chapter 28. Stump. Maxie turned in time to see the dog hurtling toward her like a flying shadow. Lunging, the beast knocked her to the ground. It sank its sharp teeth deep into her slender throat. She tried to raise one arm to protect herself, but the dog knocked it aside with a shake of his big head. and now the sharp teeth were coming down again and again. Selena was screaming and kicking and pulling at the dog, but it was useless. He was chomping away on the girl. With his massive, powerful jaws, he tossed Maxie from side to side like a rag doll. "Maxie!" Selena was screaming. "Maxie!" As if somehow the girl could do something to defend herself. Selena heard flesh ripping, bones crunching, and long after Maxie had stopped moving, the dog kept attacking, as if even Maxie's death did not satisfy the animal. Selena was kicking the dog, screaming at it, crying at it. She tried to drag Maxie's body away from its grasp, but the girl's thin arm came off in her hands. Selena's cries were silent now, her mouth open wide as if in a death grimace. She backed away. She was still holding the bloody arm. Stump finally gave up chewing on Maxie's dead body. He looked up at Selena. She staggered backward a few more steps, lost her balance, righted herself. She kept edging slowly away. She was still holding Maxie's arm, like some grisly souvenir she had won at the carnival. The dog did not follow her, just stared, his eyes gleaming with hate. He was drooling blood. The snarling creature was out for vengeance for his dead master, Selena realized. And he wasn't done yet. She kept backing up further and further. Toward what? Sooner or later she would hit the... She turned. She was about a foot from the electric fence. The wire mesh glowed bright orange, like the coils on a range when you set them on high. She could feel the heat baking the backs of her bare legs. She knelt down, holding the poor girl's severed arm out toward the dog. "Here, Stump," she called softly. She whistled. "Here, boy, fetch!" She waved the arm from side to side so that Maxie's hand waved hello at the dog. The dog raised his head, his ears straightening. His jaws worked as he licked his chops. "Come on, Stump, I've got a treat for you." Suddenly the big dog charged. Selena waved the arm in the big strokes now. She wanted to be sure the dog kept his eyes on the prize. He was about 10 yards away and coming fast. She turned and tossed the arm high in the air, right along the fence. The dog charged forward and expertly caught Maxie's wrist in his mouth. His momentum took him right into the fence. Chapter 29. Fireworks. Selena didn't look back. As she staggered away, she heard a few tiny yips. Then the burning and sizzling sounds were loud in her ears. She was shuddering violently. She looked down. The ground was rumbling as if before an earthquake. She started to run. The flames from the burning rides were licking higher and higher. Soon they would spread to the surrounding woods. Despite the searing pain of her many cuts, Selena ran faster. As she ran, clouds of black smoke snaked toward her, like malevolent ghosts. She was choking. There was a horrible wrenching sound, followed by a thunderous whirring. She looked up in time to dodge out of the way of the massive cyclotron. Spinning furiously, the ride had ripped right off of its mooring. It traveled about 20 yards down the grassy lane before it tipped to one side and smashed down onto a game booth, crushing it flat. Selena ran on. The broken heap of the water slide was one of the few rides that wasn't burning. Thin streams of water geysered uselessly over the heap of ride parts. Clouds of steam hissed off the hot metal. Near the water slide was a tree. Selena climbed it, her bloody limbs scraping in agony against the rough bark. The tree was close enough to the red-hot fence for her to jump over it. And as she limped away through the woods, the 4th of July fireworks started exploding over Crystal Lake. There were fireworks back at the fairgrounds as well. The Scrambler was the first ride to explode. Huge twisted pieces of metal flying everywhere. Like giant shrapnel. The monster blew next. When she heard the first explosion, Selena collapsed against a tree in terror. Sure, she had just been blown to bits. The light and heat rising from the carnival made the colorful explosions over the lake seem like so many firecrackers. She ran, and kept running until the booming blast from the fairgrounds no longer threatened to blow out her eardrums. She had made it. She was safe. Meanwhile, back in the Chamber of Horrors, the statues were working furiously to revive the dead body of Mitch Deaver. First, Jack the Ripper slit open Mitch's tattooed chest with his razor. Then the disemboweled woman placed her own slimy beating heart inside Mitch's chest, trying to attach the organ to the major veins and arteries. It was a wasted effort, because the funhouse was burning out of control now, and boom! A huge explosion ripped through the room. The blast sent bits of plaster bodies flying everywhere. It blew the white hockey mask right off Mitch's head. As the flimsy building splintered in all directions, the white mask went hurtling upward. The force of the explosion whipped the mask high over the electric fence, right out of the fairgrounds, spinning like a top, until at last the white mask thwacked deep into the core of a large old oak tree in the nearby woods. Smoke curled out of the gash in the bark as the mask burned and sizzled its way deep, deep into the tree's core. Then the smoke faded. Despite the efforts of local firefighters, the Fantana Traveling Funhouse and Carnival burned through the night. But the fire never reached the old oak tree where the white mask lay. Jason's mask was buried, out of sight. Other than Selena's escape, it was probably the only good thing that happened that whole awful night. For now, there was no way for the mask to work its evil ever again. Unless... Okay, guys, this has been the conclusion of Friday the 13th, The Carnival by Eric Morse. Chapters 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29. Guys, I know a lot of you really enjoyed this book, and I did too. I gotta say, this is probably my favorite of the three so far. It got a little creepy and crazy with them wax figures coming to life at the end. That was unexpected. You know, Mitch bowed out a little early before the real ending there, but yeah. So yeah, guys, what did you think? Did y'all see Maxie's death coming the way it came? That was a shocker for me. I thought that she had redeemed herself. This story was her redemption story, but apparently she redeemed herself just long enough to die. Anyways, so yeah, Selena is our sole survivor, as well as the mask. I don't know if you guys noticed, I used the whole Jason Goes to Hell thing for the ending of this book and for the ending of Jason's Curse. So it sounds all peaceful until the last line about the mask being safe, and then da-da, da-da. I think that fits this story so well, especially since Jason Goes to Hell is a movie with the whole possession angle in it too, just like these books have the possession angle. Well, guys, you don't have to wait long for the next book in the Eric Morse series, because the next upload for this channel will be Friday the 13th, number 4, Road Trip by Eric Morse. That was the last book in the series to be published physically, but little did a lot of people know, Eric Morse himself, William Pattison, wrote a 5th and final book in the series, which I will be narrating after Road Trip sometime, and it's called The Mask of Jason Voorhees. So guys, I'll be back very soon with Friday the 13th, Road Trip by Eric Morse. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too. And guys, please check out the merch store. I got some really awesome designs there. Shirts, hoodies, sweaters, mugs, stickers, pillows, you name it, I got it on the store. There's 5 designs to choose from. All sizes, all colors for the base shirt and everything. Pick the design you want on there. You're going to be walking around in slasher style while supporting the channel and getting something great out of it. Also, you can at the end, whenever you're checking out, use the promo code 10OFF, all together, no spaces, 10OFF, and you'll get 10% off your purchase every time you shop at the 80 Slasher Librarian Teespring store. All right, guys, until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80 Slasher Librarian saying, I have to finish this book series. I have to do it soon, because Eric Morse told me.
It's got a dance curve.
Ouch, 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 ouch. Stop it! Come on, stop it. Back. Bad mask, bad mask. Hey! This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morse, and you are listening to 80s Slasher Librarian's narration of my book, Friday the 13th Carnival. Enjoy.